Folks, this is the Item 19 session. We're looking forward to an interactive back and forth presentation. It's something that hopefully will be useful to you, that we can help you answer your questions. I have an amazing team of folks up here. It would be a wasted opportunity for you to have a question about Item 19 and not at least hear how these folks would handle it. So we'll take questions throughout, and we'll try to go do it. I'm Lane Fisher. Hopefully you're not yet sick of the sound of my voice, although nobody apparently listened to me about where to sit. Just like home. I'm a partner of Fisher Zucker. Obviously, this event with Brad, but this is a great session. I wanted to moderate it, and I chose the people to be on it as the people that I know to be the most knowledgeable on this topic. And there's lots of questions, but we'll see how the dialogue itself evolves. Let each of our speakers introduce themselves, talk about sort of where they're from, what their vantage point is, and so you have some context for their comments. Nick?
Thank you, Lane. Nick Sheehan. I'm a founder and managing partner at the Repum Group. And what the Repum Group is we're a full franchise development firm. So we have 4 pillars. We have our branding division, which is called Brandum. We have our Grow'em division, which was really labeled as our franchise sales organization. We have a Build'em division, which actually manages all the construction management, finds the leases for franchisees with our retail concepts. And then we have a Scale'em division, which is our operational arm. So most of our brands, because they are emerging, we're working with them, helping them operationally get set up the right way from the get-go. If they're not a franchise today, we help that. And if they're already franchised, just make sure that they're ready for the growth that we're about to help them with.
Okay. Ryan?
I'm Ryan Comby. I'm the managing partner with Cornerstone Franchise Partners. I've launched 6 brands myself, helped probably 50 plus get into franchising. At Cornerstone, we work with only service brands, and we identify holes in the market of franchising, and we either find a business and buy it and turn it into a franchise, or we partner with a brand new emerging franchise to help them launch. We do a little more of like a slow and steady pace with service brands.
Okay. Doug?
Good morning, all. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. For Nick, Ryan, Lane, and myself, we thank you for spending some time with us today. My name's Doug Shadle. I'm co-founder and CEO of Rhino 7. My partner John Cohen and I launched Rhino 7 back in 1999, so we've been around a while. We are a full-service development firm, very similar to Nick with Repum. We are a franchise sales organization. We have construction management division that helps our medical and retail franchisees. We help find their sites, build their units out for them. We do operational systems. We are also franchisors, and we operate 3 different franchises. Our oldest one's getting ready to be 13 years old. So Rhino 7's more of a development type firm. But I think a lot of people recognize us for franchise sales because that's what's more visible out there, but we do all the different pieces.
Just at an overarching level, why do firms like yours offer those other services?
Well, I'll kind of start and then let Nick jump in. So over time, we've realized, right, that we need to help emerging brands more. You can't know what you don't know, right? So it's a piece that helps us come in, keeps them ahead of where they're going, and helps them stay organized. It's not just software, but it's people, it's construction, it's whatever really they need. So to kind of make that simpler, we want to make them stronger than they would be, right, in time. So if they're a 1-year-old emerging brand, we want to make them like they're a 5-year-old brand, right? And give them the pieces of the pie that they need to be able to facilitate what's needed. Because if they're lucky, they'll grow, right? And if you grow, you've got to have infrastructure to take care of people and help them get the return on their investment that they trusted you with their life savings.
So there are people that just sell. I'm going to let you have it in 1 second. There are people that just sell, right? They sell, you have a discussion, you get a bunch sold. But I think that's the question of like, what next, right? And so, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, just to add a little bit what Doug said, I think I felt the same way when we founded the Repum Group. I'd been franchising since I was 23. I was in the ink and toner recycling business as a young kid, knocking on doors, door to door, and I started a brand. And I just learned that in that experience for myself, from ages 23 to 30, there was no roadmap for me in franchising, and I made a lot of mistakes. I did some things good at the same time, but I kind of wished, or I didn't kind of, I really wish somebody could have helped me the way that we try to help brands today. And everything that Doug said is accurate, what Repham does too. But it's really important. I think as an emerging brand, when you come into the market, there's a lot of people you can get advice from. There's going to be good advice and some bad advice. But if you can seek out the experts that have been there and done that often and done it for years, and you could see their track record, like a Rhino 7 or like a Repham, I think you're going to be met with success and do it the right way, and hopefully have a better ability to sleep at night a little bit as you grow your national brand, because let's be honest, it's not an easy thing to do. And there's going to be a lot of things you need to think about along the way, not only from a financial perspective, but are you fit to grow the brand, right? Because a lot of founders have to look themselves in the mirror and say, am I the guy that can take this or gal that take this to market on a national level or not? And who do I surround myself with in helping them get through that?
So brokers are expensive, right? I'm trying to make a point here and juxtapose something, not to just pitch people services, but brokers perform a service and it's expensive. And I think it's not a one-size-fits-all for everybody, and it's certainly not a one-size-fits-all in terms of when, right? Because it could be out of the box, or it could be after you have a certain number of units. And there are many reasons folks would opt not to start with a broker or try to do it more internally. Ryan, why don't you explain why would you opt to do it internally or not use brokers?
Some of it depends on your timeline, right? So how fast are you looking to grow? How are you looking to expand into markets? How much money do you have? Like if you're going to pick the path of using exclusively brokers, you got to make sure that you've got a decent amount of cash to support that. So like what these guys do is great, because they at some point got to the point with the area where they were like, we cannot sell 50 franchises for this brand if we don't show them how to launch those 50. Otherwise, you're going to end up with 48 sold and not open. And so, and I will build on what Nick, like there's a lot of people you can get advice from in this room, but what's unique about franchising is like where you went to high school and like your circle of friends where you grew up, you're probably the only person they know that's in franchising. Like everybody knows 27 real estate agents, they know pharmaceutical reps, they know attorneys, they know everything. But if you say to somebody, who do you know that works in franchising? Like you're going to be the only person they know. And so it's hard to find the right advice a lot of times on how to grow your brand. And so and how to grow each level of the brand. So it's nice to have people that can take you all the way through.
It's very brand specific. All right, so now we're going to dial into item 19. Let me see how many franchisors we have in the room. Okay, and keep your hand up, but put your hand down if you do not have an item 19. Okay, so it looks like most people have them. So we can skip that first chapter of whether you should have them, because we all seem to think that it is a very difficult proposition selling franchises without one. Doug?
I think when you're an emerging brand, right, and your lawyer's helping you put your FDD together, you're trying to just figure out how to get them all the information that they need so that you can get this document back. And then when you get it back, you kind of go, ooh, you breathe a sigh of relief that you have it. That's just the start, right? So one thing that I want to say, and it's a little bit off the item 19 stuff, is no one should know your document better than you, ever, right? You need to know your franchise agreement and your FDD top to bottom, soup to nuts. And if you go through it and you don't know what you're reading, neither will your candidates, right? You got to go back to your attorney and say, what is this? Why is it in here? Does it really fit us? Whatever it may be. So when you're building an FDD and then you're going to redo it basically every year, the item 19 related to the item 6 and 7 is probably the most critical piece of what you're doing, right? When somebody's buying a franchise, right, they want to know 4 things, right? What the business is and does, you can teach them that. What their role's going to have to be, how much is it going to cost them, and how, in their mind, how much can I make? Which in the FDD is past financial performance, right? So those 4 things give them the ability to know whether they would entertain your franchise, right? So
It's probably in the reverse order. They want to know
yes.
how much I'm going to make, and then the
It's true. Ryan's nailed it, right? So your item 19 needs to be very detailed. So we're going to jump into that more. But if you've got salespeople that are trying to sell and you're an emerging brand and you've got a very vague item 19, like let's just say gross sales, you're putting your staff in a very, very bad position, right? Because you're telling them to feed their family without the real information they need to be able to do it. And so they're probably going to break the law, right? So that they can get that deal done and get paid, right? So a detailed item 19 is very, very much for your own protection, your team's protection, and it'll serve you well in the end because you just steer people to there.
Why?
Right.
Because a judge finds it impossible to believe that you would rely on oral representations that you heard from, quote, some guy or gal, rather than the published official FDD document that is filed in registration states. One is an official document and was issued by the company, and one is scuttlebutt. So if you have the official, all the information in the official document, you have a layer of protection between you and claims that anybody, the claims are so vague when they're asserted about what the expenses are, but or what your profitability or bottom line will be, that it really, most people would interpret that the numbers are bad, right? If you only have your top line, it means you can't sort out the profit part because it's either too dissimilar or too disparity, or whatever. But okay, so anybody else have anything on this? No. So let's talk about metrics. What do you put in an item 19, right? And what is an item 19? Anybody know what one is? Right. So it's any information from which you can get or discern a level of earnings or profits. People will say, no, this is the one, this is on my PowerPoint. Well, okay, it's the same thing, right? It doesn't matter where it is or where you give it or how you convey it. It matters whether it's not in the item 19 in your FDD and you utter it, right? It's that simple. And I'm shocked at the level, who said read of the documents and know them? I'm shocked that people don't read their own PowerPoint presentations and know that they're gonna run afoul of something, right? If you can't find authority for what you're saying in the item 19, you're probably saying too much. If you're not covering the identical time period, you're probably saying too much. So it's these PowerPoints, people are trying to like do sizzle reels and sizzle stuff, but it really is where people get in trouble. How do I know that? That's what I do for a living, right? I get these letters every day that say what people did or didn't do. But let's talk about the kind of metrics you can put in an item 19. Nick?
Yeah, so I think what Doug was saying, just on thinking about what to put in it, is we look at as much detail as possible to be put into the item 19, so that to Doug's point, your sales staff doesn't get into trouble by not having the information needed. So think about it as if a prospect can really poke holes into the whatever you've disclosed in item 19. Like let's say you have top line sales and disclose partial P&Ls. There's opportunity for your sales team to have to say, well, this is just this number, or this is just that number. We should just put this in this blank area, right? And that's an earnings claim, which you can't do. So our mindset, because we work with brands that aren't franchised today, we also have brands that have maybe 5 franchise locations, and then the third we have a few brands that have 100 plus open. So if you put those 3 categories there, the first one is if you're not franchised today, we do not allow brands to come on board if they don't have a full P&L, because there's nobody to validate it, right? They're going to validate with corporate, and then your sales team's really in a bad place. And frankly, the franchisor is too, because how are they selling a franchise without providing the detailed information of the corporate locations? So we try to go as far back as we can. If they have 5 years of data, 6 years of data, we'll disclose as far back as we can so they can also see the ramp of the business, not just, hey, this business made $1 million this year, but it's been in business for 10 years, because that's also can be misleading if you think about it. So that's one. If it's somewhere in the middle, looking at disclosed top line numbers and only a partial P&L, you got to make sure, if that's going to be the case and you just can't disclose the full P&L, that you have franchisees that are able to validate it, right? Because if you're going to give them a blank pro forma, which has to be blank, right? They need somebody to validate those numbers they can't find or that you cannot even speak to, right? And then the third, I think, was if you have a bigger brand, like over 100 licenses or 100 units open like we have, they do not have a full P&L, but they do have all the disclosed expenses, and there's just a few items that they have to fill in. And it's quite easy for them to go to talk to 10 franchisees, right, and get full P&Ls. They have a lot of franchisees that have been in business for 10 years, have a lot of data. They're the top performers, have been franchisor relies on them to do a lot of things for them and help them here. And so they're able to get plenty of answers around it. And it's a bigger scale of example. It's not one franchisee that has done it for one area in Wisconsin, for example, right? They can talk to someone in New York, they can talk to someone in Chicago, LA, whatever, and that helps. So that's what we look at. And when we do it, we also do provide a pro forma. But one of the big things is an absolute blank pro forma. You cannot fill in one number at all with that, and making sure that they know how to use a pro forma is the only thing we do is explain how to use it so they can go and plug in their own data.
So that's what we do. The pro forma piece is the purpose. So the other thing too I want to jump back to, like, you know, like where Lane's hosting it and we all have attorneys, and a lot of times the conversation becomes around like, you know, how do I cover my butt if I ever get sued or whatever. But the real purpose of franchising is to make your franchisees money, right? Like hopefully you all got into this business so that you could sell a business to someone and have them have a better lifestyle and make money. And so by putting together a good item 19, you really can give people an accurate depiction on this is what you can, this is how successful you can be with this business. So we don't do full P&Ls, but we give the data that you can build your own pro forma based on where you live. So we give, this is how many jobs we do, this is the average job, this is how many labor hours it takes to do this job, this is how much the insurance cost is, this is how all of that, so that you can take the numbers of somebody, you know, of the location in Long Island, and you can apply those labor numbers to Omaha, Nebraska, or Atlanta, Georgia, or whatever, using, because labor is going to be different, right? Insurance costs are going to be different. Vehicle costs are going to be different. So giving people enough information that they can customize their pro forma to where they live.
Any thoughts on metrics, Doug?
You know, Nick and Ryan were saying about details in the item 19, especially Nick was jumping on that. If you're talking about your average ticket with a prospect, it better say that in the item 19, right? So you're pulling out average job size, how many jobs you do a month on the average, as much as you can possibly get into. So when you're kind of building your FDD, right, your item 6 is really reverse engineered out of your item 19, right? Because you need those details, and then you're taking your item 6, what the franchisor is plugging in as cost that they never had, right? You want to get those into your item 19.
So just so we're not talking in code, item 6 is where you list the fees. And so you're talking about adjusting the performance of company units to contemplate fees that the franchisee will pay, but not you, but identifying them in separate adjustment line items, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Right, and that protects you, right? Because you're given a more realistic picture of what they're looking at, and then your attorneys will put notes in that these fees were not part of the original, but they're in there for them to calculate out. And that pro forma that they're going to want to build, right? They need to be able to plug everything into it, and the easier that you make that for them to go get that information, rather than having to validate hard to find it, will help you, right? So when you're an emerging brand, and when I say let's talk about real emerging, you don't really have any franchisees, right? You're not building your sales system for validation. You're building your sales system to validate the franchisor, not the franchisee. And so you have to have that, and you're probably going to run that for almost 2 years before you modify it into validation of the franchisee, right? So there are 2 different types of way you roll the business out, and your item 19 is basically what you have to use as your tool, and the secret weapon, as this is called, right? It's your tool.
That's actually a great point, and I haven't heard expressed that way, but this is why I have these folks up here. The purpose of an item 19 used to be to show the business in the most favorable light financially, right? That's what we all used to try to get the best numbers on the book. But we're in a world of responsible franchising, and not to beat a drum that needs to be beaten, is that responsible franchising requires you to, I think, manage expectations. I mean, what really I'm suggesting the purpose of it is to manage expectations. You need people to validate. That is to express their satisfaction with their purchase when new people call them. And in order to validate, they need to what happens needs to be what they expect and not be diametrically opposite or under what they expect. So I think a large part of this and a large part of the details you put in are to manage the people's expectations so they don't think they're doing poorly when they're doing exactly as you expect. Now, we've talked a lot, and there's a lot more to talk about in terms of financial performance representations that are economic, whether they are gross sales, whether they are net income, whether they are dollars per job, per square foot, but there are also financial performance representations that are not economic, that talk about number of jobs. And, well, here, does anybody work on non-financial financial performance representations? Want to talk about some?
Like number of jobs?
Well, like something that's not numbers, right? And something they're not promises I'm going to make $1 million, right? They're other attributes of the business that cast it in a favorable light. So, yeah.
Yeah, number of jobs, labor hours, like I mentioned, those are the types of things that will go. But you're talking favorable light. So, okay, so this is an example. I used to work for a brand, and we had a deal with the Home Depot. We had a 6 by 9 foot display in every Home Depot. And we would go in and we would disclose how many Home Depots you had in the territory that you were buying and what the average amount of revenue that came from a Home Depot was there. So so that would be like a non-number where you'd be able to say, okay, well, I'm buying Bucks County. There's 4 Home Depots there. In their item 19, it says I could count on X number. I shouldn't even use the term count on, but a Home Depot averages X amount of revenue. And so if I buy this territory, I can kind of pencil that in per those locations.
You have anything on non-financial?
I mean, just certain things. There's always nuances to every type of business, and I think, I guess this is kind of an earnings, but one way that we had a brand that was backed by, it was a therapy-based brand called Ellie Mental Health, and a big one there was insurance reimbursable rates per state. And so we had to be able to figure out how to disclose that because no one could go to them and say, what are your reimbursable rates? Now they can Google it and find some of it, but we actually had an expert go in and fact check it within the states so that each state that they would go into, they could figure out the range. Because as they are collecting the insurance, it's a tough thing to get the exact number. Even if it's a range, when you go to actually bid it out, it might not be in that range, right? It might fall shorter of that. So we had to figure out a way to do that. It was kind of complicated, but we got through it. So that's a unique one, I think, that I thought of around the item 19.
It's cool, though, because then you could use that data that you put together for the item 19 on where you want to market to sell franchises. Because you're not going to try to sell a franchise somewhere where you can't get paid. And so that's interesting.
I was thinking of something a little bit more obvious, like productivity of a salesman. I don't know, I go to 100 jobs, I close 80% of them. That'd be something that would take the sting out of, do people buy this thing or not, right? We're just trying to figure out how to make the business look more doable to a regular person who probably has zero experience in it.
I was going to say one with fitness actually is attrition. So if you have a location that has an average, let's just say 500 members, you can look at month by month, what we would disclose, like they lose 5% a month or gain 5%, because it's also hard to determine if you're just showing, hey, they have 500 members this year. If you don't disclose the membership count up and down month over month, it was challenging them to get to the number on how they're going to ramp up and how they're going to continue to keep that business going in that.
Doug, anything on that, Cash?
Yeah, probably the best way for us to describe this is you know your business best. And so you want to pull out all the best details about it and stick it in the item 19 so that you can utilize it and so that you don't cross the line and talk about stuff that you didn't disclose. Right? So especially when you've got somebody in today's environment that's wanting to learn the franchise by emailing with your sales team back and forth on these huge strings. You want to make sure that everything you're communicating about is in your item 19.
And let's be honest, anyone can record anything today, right? And that's the other thing. So I always tell my sales team, don't think for a second that they're not recording you some way, shape, or form, and that everything you say isn't heard through the ether of Google or Instagram or whatever, it follows you these days. So make sure that you're doing everything above board, because if you're not, it will be found out one way or another. There's no question about it.
Anybody have any questions? I have some questions about it, because I think it is very specific. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir. Are you asking how you account for geographic differences in things like labor, which is radically different, right, in California?
So that's why we only disclose labor hours. Instead of a total, the cost of labor, or the dollar amount per location, we disclose labor hours per job. So that you can then say, in LA, I'm gonna pay this much for an hour of labor. In Dallas, I'm gonna pay this much. In Topeka, I'm gonna pay this much. And you can do those numbers yourself. Everybody knows that you pay more for labor in LA, right, or New York, and so some of that's not necessary. But again, you just want to give people, you want to give them the opportunity to build their own performa based on where they're at.
And I think you use footnotes to disclose what it is that what you're finding, right? If you have one in California, one in Pennsylvania, our minimum wage is in the $8 range versus $22 range. I assure you that will have a huge impact on your item 19. And that's, a lot of people are wondering what will happen, right? What's the world going to look like later? I remember a time when they took California they did 49 state profile and left California out. And then it was joined by Las Vegas, because they were not representative. It was just and it was much more predictable in those other states, but not in places which were in much more sort of either regulatory or cost turmoil. Ron. Yeah, you're still going to be held to know what your experience is to date, right? If you have locations in places, you know that. And then if you're actively pursuing other places that you know to be radically different, you need a way to deal with that either in ranges or highs and lows. I mean, you have more options when you have more than 10 units because you have ability to classify them or stratify them into subsets. But without that, you're really explaining geographic differences as they exist in a way that I think will make, if you explain it well, it'll be understood. But it's a pretty big dramatic difference. Yes, in the back. So the over-under median part is part of the FTC rule that requires you, when you put a number in, to talk about the ones that are above and below it. So that's a required disclosure in any event. Well, it would be, so you'd have one unit doing at this higher, yes, it would come out, but it wouldn't be as obvious as it would be in a footnote to item 19 that would explain that geographic difference. Yeah. Because you don't want to show that here's the average, and they were all under the, like 29 of them were under the average, and none of them were above, because it's weighted up by some radically high number, right? So it'll average itself down, but it won't explain the geographic difference. Do you guys see that any different? No. Okay, so, yes, sir. You want the lawyer or you want a practical guy? I'll take it. You're only allowed to use numbers you have a high degree of confidence in terms of their preparation in accordance with GAAP. And if you know somebody, first of all, operating all in cash is not illegal, right? I mean, you can record your expenses quite accurately in cash just like you can in any other currency. But if you don't have a high degree of confidence in them, I wouldn't put them in. But here's what I find. People are understating the cash and understating the gross sales. So putting them in at artificially depressed numbers only hurts you. I would actually want to, if I have my own that have numbers that I have a high degree of confidence in, I think you have a good basis for using those and excluding the others. And that would be the basis, because you don't have a high degree of confidence in there.
But I'd go a step further on, like, that's a problem you've got to figure out. Because if you don't have an accurate enough number to put it in the item 19, then how are you collecting your royalties? How are you collecting your other fees that are what make the franchise go? And so there's got to be, you got to figure out a way to track that kind of stuff. Oh, so you're just selling them the product. I got you.
But you know what they consume, and you probably, from your own experience, could probably reverse engineer within $25 what they did in gross sales based on what they consumed. And that's what gives you either a basis or no basis, because you know it's wildly inconsistent with your own experience, which is the one you actually have a high degree of confidence in.
You could always mandate accounting in your FDD. And then all that goes out the window, right? Because you have access to everything at any given second. So that's a charge that a lot of franchisees wouldn't like, but then everybody's uniform, everybody's working on the same chart of accounts. Your support team knows how to speak to people because everything's in the way it needs to be, and you know everything.
You're saying not that they keep uniform accounts. You're saying that you have access to them through the accounting selection of the bookkeeper? Yes. Okay. And if you're going to have access to everything from having access to all the bookkeeping records, you should probably do something with it rather than just watch them be terrible, right? If you're going to take action, you have to really take action and get access to everything. You better have some process.
Because you're already doing it with whatever CRM or software they're using for their customer base. You can see everything all the time. So this is just an extension of that. And I would say that the guys, they would agree that stuff's becoming very, very popular, right? It's a much better way to help manage the franchisee.
And collecting P&Ls, but you always have uniform chart of accounts. You don't want somebody, you're actually trying to create integrity around your core expenses, right? So that they're not putting the kitchen sink or the grandmother's cell phone or health insurance or home health care workers in your P&L, right? So, and if you have ones that have the, the junk in the trunk, you would try to isolate those, but have the principal expense categories have a lot of integrity in a way that you can pull them off and look at them uniformly. How are you going to help somebody manage to benchmarks if there is no uniform way of calculating the benchmarks?
We had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
You just have to disclose that they're an affiliate.
The standard is substantially similar business. Doesn't have to be owned by the same. It has to be substantially similar, and that's the standard. So if your affiliate operates under the same name, the same services, the same everything else, it becomes. And you're shaking your head because that's the issue, right? Because sometimes the affiliate does 10 things, and you're going to franchise 5 of them. So is it still the same? And that's going to vary in each thing. If the things you don't do represented less than 3% of your collective gross sales, it's far less consequential than if they were 40% of your gross sales, but you just don't want to do them because they have too big a capital requirement or too big some other requirement in terms of how you do it. But it impacts whether you can use those affiliate statements. And there's a point where you can adjust them, but there's a point where you adjust them too much, where they are not substantially similar.
I was just going to add, if it is an affiliate, the one thing that you want to make sure is when you disclose their P&L, you want to make sure that it's as close as possible to your location, disclosing the royalties, adding in things that a franchisee, if they bought tomorrow, are going to operate as. If it's far off, their P&L is different because, for example, they don't pay a royalty or they don't pay an ad fund or they don't do whatever it is. You got to make sure you add that in, otherwise it'll be misleading to them.
Well, and it'll hurt you. Because everybody that looks at it will be like, well, yeah, well, they're making money, but you're not charging them an 8% royalty. And so then you're in a conversation of, do you want to negotiate the royalty rate and on down the line? But
yeah, this is probably a good time for us to bring into the item 19 territory. We were talking about it earlier this morning. So if you're using your affiliate and they're covering, let's say, all of Greater Charlotte, but you're going to sell territories at 250,000 population, that item 19 is not reverse engineered into what you're selling. Right, so you have to be really, really careful with that.
So if that's 4 territories and you do $1 million, right, and you're trying to reflect that as a territory affiliate doing $1 million, if you're in 4 times the size territory you're giving anybody else, it's really suggests an AUV of 250 in each of 4 territories, which sometimes sort of undermines what you were trying to do. But that is how you will develop your reasonable basis.
Yeah, we have a good example of it is. Oh, sorry, Doug. No, go ahead. I was going to say we have a brand that we're launching shortly. It's called the Wow Window Box. They actually put window boxes in your house, put the flowers in. They do commercial like steakhouses and or hotels and so on. But they're in Cincinnati, Ohio, and they have pretty much the whole territory. So we were trying to figure out, okay, if franchisee opens tomorrow, how many are these territories legit? Doing 4.9 million in revenue, or whatever, top line. Like, is it 4 territories? Is it 5? Is it 3? And so we're helping them map out now, like if a franchisee bought that tomorrow, are they really operating out of 4 territories, or are they operating out of 3 or 5? And we haven't worked that out yet, but we will before we launch it, right? Because we got to make sure that's all locked in, especially because they're not a franchise today. So they're gonna, all the franchisees buying are gonna have to lean into something, and that's the only thing they're gonna be able to lean into with that brand.
So we'll break it down by county. So I will say that's the biggest mistake emerging brands make. Is, well, there's two. The first would be geography. They say we did $1 million, but we were operating in the greater Philadelphia area, right? It's like, well, that's like one of the 5 biggest metros in the U.S. So they'll say we did $1 million out of 1 unit when it would break down to like 10 units, and then they don't properly disclose how long that 1 unit's been in business to work up to that amount of revenue. And so, but what we'll do is we'll go, like if it's in that situation, we would say, here's Warren County, we would break down by county how much revenue was done in that county, what the population of that county is, so that people could then relate it back to the population of what they're buying and how much revenue could be possible.
And just one thing to add to that, also, if you don't know the exact, be conservative with it, which means give them a little bit more population, I think, when you look at it, because if you're going too small, for example, if the average service brand allows 250,000 people, and you do some research with other franchisors that are in a similar space to you, don't say, well, I'm going to give the franchisees 150,000, because then that can hurt you and the franchisee, and then you'll have disgruntled franchisees going into it for the first 10 because they're like, well, you didn't give me enough territory to operate in, and so on and so forth.
Well, and when you look like a founder, this is what I always say, like the founder's ability to run the actual core business is all the way up here, and their managers or employees' ability is right here. Your franchisee's ability to run this business, I actually call it their level of give a shit, but it's going to be right here, and their employees is going to be down here, right? So you've got to account for that kind of like drop in ability. Like the founder's ability is going to be here, the franchisee's here, the founder's manager is here, the franchisee's manager is going to be here. You got to base the population on here, right? On what this guy, the manager of the franchisee, or what the franchisee's ability is, not what the founder's ability is.
I want to cover one more thing on the territory. So if you're an emerging brand and you're just getting started, you are what you are, right? So if it takes all of greater Philadelphia for that business to generate good revenue for a franchisee, and you know that, then you're probably what we would call a true area developer franchise, where that's all you sell everywhere you go, right? Somebody buys all greater Raleigh-Durham, all greater Charlotte, right? Not smaller pockets. So you've really got to pay attention to that and figure out what you're going to be, and then you can basically, once again, reverse engineer that into your territory model. So you need somebody to help you.
And that's okay. Like with one of the brands we own, our goal is to get to $100 million of revenue with 50 franchisees. And so we're okay selling. So we've got, like, we're trying to sell the 50 biggest metros in the U.S. and have them each do $2 million. We're not trying to sell 400 franchises to get to $1 million or 500. Like, we're okay selling a big area as long as we think that franchisee can get to the $2 million of revenue goal that we have set.
If you're a brand that has lower gross sales, right, per franchisee, then you have to have more of them. If you have really high gross sales, then you really want less franchisees. It's more efficient. You can focus on them better. You don't have all the cost of constantly adding more and more labor, so you can cover more and more small grossing franchisees. So brands that are low gross, high margin, they have a different development model, right, than high gross, moderate margin.
But Doug, how do I end up not losing Philadelphia, the 6th largest area in terms of people, and ending up with the guy that bought 3 when it could have held 53? Like, is there adaptations to that strategy that have the territory revert back ultimately and be able to resell? Or at the same time,
you're helping us with it, right? You put a development schedule of what they've got to do on, let's say it's vehicles. They got to add vehicles every 9 months, every year, whatever it is, and then you're going to roll with the punches on it. But there's different strategies for different brands. I mean, a market penetration strategy is determining how many you're going to put in the market first, and then you sell to that number across multiple franchisees where they don't get a territory. They get an area of protection when they get a lease. So that works really well.
We just launched, we call it a major market expansion program. But if you're going to enter one of the 50 largest metros in the U.S., you buy a certain number of territories, and then we agree to take the remaining territories out of inventory for a period of 18 months, and we put together a bunch of benchmarks for you to hit. And if at the end of that 18 months you've hit those revenue benchmarks and your business is operating, then you have the opportunity to buy remaining territories and actually own that whole metro. So that's kind of like our way of, because to your point, I don't want to sell Philadelphia to somebody that sucks, but I also don't want to sell it to 50 people. And so it's kind of our way of making sure that we're selling it to the right person, giving us that opportunity to go find that right person if the one we thought initially wasn't it, and not have to blow out 25 people in one market.
Okay. So I just want to touch on a slightly different area. So there are people that sell, I'm going to talk about 3-packs for a minute. There are people that sell 3-packs where they are opened serially. You sign an agreement for one, there's a development schedule, you sign the second one, you sign the third one, but you're in territory one first, and that's what you have, and so on. And then there are other people who sell 3-packs that sell you 3 territories at a time, right? So distinguishing between those two things. I've come across a lot that sell 3 territories at a time and 1 truck. You do 1 truck, I can pretty much, most people can tell you within 50 cents of what that truck could do in terms of a range. And if I give that, first there's the anomaly, I'm going to have a truck drive 500 miles to go service 1 territory. It isn't. How do you protect against it being like that gross sales of that 1 truck, call it 180, being divided by 3, because it's 3 territories and not 1? What's the strategy?
I mean, we look at what service brands, if you look at like a retail brand, simple example, the 3-pack, they're going to develop 3, for example, over maybe 3 years, whatever timeline the franchisor allows for. We look at service brands, if it's a truck-based business, for example, and they buy 3 territories, it's kind of the same thing. The truck is the retail store, right? So they have one location that they're going to start with. That truck might service more than just their one targeted area, because they can start servicing the other areas. But as they expand to, let's say they get to $500,000 in revenue, or whatever the benchmark is that the franchisor says, hey, you need another truck, then they get the second truck and then the third truck based on revenue. And there's minimums they have to hit, right? Because what you don't want in service brands is they buy 3 territories and they never service the 3 areas, right? And so that's a big part of that too, to make sure that you have, Ryan's point, like the right franchisee in the seat, and if not, get someone in there that can operate that market and grow it.
It's a really good point on a vehicle-related franchisor, right? If somebody buys the rights to 3 territories and they're going to start with 1 vehicle and then grow into 2 and 3, their opportunity for success is better because they're servicing a bigger market out of the gate. They can go get the low-hanging fruit faster, right? So the disadvantage is they may never get to that 3rd van, and then you have to deal with it. The good part is it's kind of a safety blanket around them when they have more territory, because they're going to have the capability to grow faster.
So our number one launch metric that we use is data first dollar. So like years ago, I did a case study across over 3,000 franchisees, and we looked at what determined success in 12 months, 24 months, 36, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. Education background, how many units they opened, what was the lead source, whatever. And what we found was the number one indicator of success to all of those was data first dollar. The faster somebody made money, the more likely they were to be in business in 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years. So our entire launch strategy is based around how fast can I make this person, how fast can I get them their first job? So if I sell somebody 3 territories, like you said, there's more low-hanging fruit. We don't necessarily care about getting them the 3 trucks. We care about getting them 3 jobs right off the bat. And then as that business continues to grow, it's easier in 6 months to add your 2nd truck, your 3rd truck.
It's always easier to pull franchisees along than to push them, right? So if they're growing, they're going to want that 2nd truck, right? They want to go get it. If they're not growing, they're not going to like it that it's month 9 and you're requiring them to buy another truck, right? You're going to have a talk with them. So, like Ryan was saying, you want them to take off fast, and it fixes a lot of that growing pains that every brand, every franchisee always has.
One of our partners, he called me the other day, and he's like, this franchisee is driving me crazy. All he keeps talking about is how I can help him hire somebody else and how I can help him do. He's like, I'm spending half my day talking with this guy. And I was like, yeah, imagine if he wasn't making money, right? Like if you think he's a pain when he's making all this money, imagine if he wasn't making money. So again, like all of this goes back to, if you're doing things with the goal of I'm setting this person up for success to make money, the other stuff, they're gonna come along.
I'm going to just hit a couple points just with and maybe one of you could respond to them, but it's the kind of thing, I'm using my mental Rolodex to think of where people assert claims. So you heard people talk about a blank pro forma, right? That means you can have the categories of expenses. That's actually helpful. But you can't fill any of the numbers, and you can't use formulas to populate numbers that are in the box. When you look at a blank pro forma printed out, guess what it looks like? Blank. Side of case was blank pro forma. They open it up on the screen. They shine it up on the thing. You move the cursor over a million different spots. Big thought bubbles come up with all kinds of information. The client actually thought they were being helpful because the information was consistent with item 19. But you can't do it, right? It has to be an absolute crystal clear, squeaky clean pro forma that they prepare themselves. And you have to make sure. And when they send it to you to say, hey, I did a great pro forma, here it is, you can't comment on it. In fact, I don't even want that to be the last piece of correspondence. I want the last piece of correspondence to be, I can't comment on that. So it doesn't look like you got it and gave it the 2 thumbs up, verbally or tacitly by moving forward, right? So we want to clean that stuff up. What other things come up? The steering, right? So people say to me, Lane, you don't understand. We have a lot of franchisees that are interested in the thing, and I have 2 units. I can't possibly give them all that gal or guy's number because it will overwhelm the franchisee to give this validation. So we're going to have a conference call. We're going to convene people in and bring people in to try to do this more efficiently. The FTC doesn't recognize efficiency in giving or disseminating your information, right? So you can do it, but you can't convey item 19 information, financial performance representation, because when you put the person up and you write the invitations and you write the thank you notes and you write the room and you put them together and then put the person up, they are your agent for that purpose, or at least that's what franchisees argue after the fact when they're trying to, make some claim about it.
That's a good point. So your item 19 is your protection basically against everything. You don't want to facilitate franchisees sending their P&Ls and their performance. You want that, this is what we do, let the franchisee do what they do. That's all you can do. Otherwise, if you're emailing a franchisee and saying, hey, would you mind sending your performa to this prospect for me, right? You want them to do that, but you can't really facilitate that. You got to have conversations with franchisees.
And every franchisee attorney, if there's a dispute, will start with item 19.
Yeah.
Like if you get a demand letter, it's going to state item 19 very first that's where they're going to start digging. Guaranteed, the very first thing will be item 19 stuff.
Yeah, and one thing, if you are an emerging brand, I would say the thing you do before you launch or as you're launching, more aggressively, let's say, in growth, you better prepare your franchisees for what's going to happen, which is these franchise candidates are going to come in and they're going to ask a ton of questions about everything. And they just need to know the rules of what they can say and not say. I mean, they can say what they want, obviously, but if they understand what they're trying to get at and why, it'll really help. And I think by preparing them, it'll help you on the other side when you have candidates come in. If they do wind up signing, they were able to get all the information they need so that, 2 years down the line, they don't come back to you and say, well, you didn't provide me any information because the franchisees couldn't say X, Y, Z, or I didn't know that. So preparation's key there, I think.
You really got to help your franchisees, especially as they mature and your system matures over time, because that franchisee doesn't know what's in your item 19. Correct. They didn't get the FDD, not unless you sent it to them, and schedule a time to talk to them for 15 minutes and say, here's what's in here now, here, so that they can go, okay, when they talk to somebody, because the prospect's going to go, do you think I could do what's in the item 19 to the franchisee, right? And then they're going to go yes or no,
Or even worse, could I do the top quartile of the item 19?
which they can ask the franchisee that. That's perfectly fine. We just can't tell them that.
I would say this, though. In crafting an item 19, you have to figure out what information you need to convey. And it's specific to each business in terms of what the key metrics are. And and sometimes to address the boogeyman in the room. If people think that the manager of a location costs $100,000 and that's some big pushback, and you know they cost 40, that's a good spot to try to dispel that notion and move forward. So it's, and I'm so shocked at how many times the process is undertaken between like the least connected guy to the business, who is a financial person, and me, or somebody in my office, rather than the frontline salespeople who are actually dealing with the questions and the objections. That it would be nice to know I could put it in here. I can capture anything. If you have the data, I can put it in. If you don't have the data, I can likely give you a means to survey it or collect it through a benchmarking study or some other way to fill in the blanks for the critical pieces that you don't have. But thinking about what needs to be in there and thinking about it early enough before the thing's due, not like the 28th of April and everybody's like, hair's frazzled, and what was wrong with your one last year? What did you wish your one last year had? And sit down with your lawyer and tell them that. And when these folks get it, when you think you did a perfect job, you'll see they will not rip it to shreds, but they will show you what it means to detail an item 19 and to try to show all the contingencies, because they're experts. I go to them for counseling on my item 19s.
Well, and I'll say, if you have the data, put it in. Like Lane told me this. Like if you put all the data together and you're like, oh, well, let's not put this in because this might cause some negative conversations or whatever. But like Lane's word for word to me was like, if they ever go back and they find that you wrote that on a piece of paper in Discovery and you purposely withheld that from your item 19 because you didn't like the way it looked, then you're toast. And so it's like, if you've got the data, put it in, and to Lane's point, and then just control that part of the conversation. I always call it the George Costanza technique, where like when George Costanza does everything the opposite, he's like, hey, I'm George, I'm unemployed and live with my parents. It's like, if you get the negative information out there, it gives you a chance to control it, and usually the conversation's gonna go a lot better.
That's a really good point. So, quick survey. Who in the room, when they're selling a franchise, aggressively uses their FDD to get it done? Awesome. But look how few there are, right? You want to use that as a tool. You've got to use it as a tool and embrace it and get it out early and go into your item 19 and help answer any questions on it, right? Because you kind of saw what the numbers were here. That means almost everybody else isn't even doing that. So it gives you a huge advantage over the other
You said
brands.
something we had a prep meeting, was that banks are lending on item 7, right? So you understate your working capital to keep it the lowest number possible, but you need more. You're undercutting your own, right, and your own capital requests. So it's
You're setting them up to fail, right? Because if they're on that side and with the loan, then they don't have a lot of cash, right? And they're gonna run out before they get to positive cash flow. So we were having a conversation about putting a year's worth of working capital in the item 7.
So that's funny. We could talk about this all day. I see them
Painful.
like pounding at the door. And you want the last word?
So I think somebody had a question over here, though. Maybe
Okay.
they bounced.
Yes, sir.
If you have 20, for example, the first thing is if ones that are not open for a full year of operation, you do not have to disclose. Anything over a year, you do have to disclose. Then you have a couple options, right? One is you could disclose the averages, right? High, medium, and low. That's what I would recommend doing if you can put that into categories. Or if you really want to get detailed, you just include all the P&Ls for all 20 locations, and you can have a 20-page item 19.
But I would
Because
say
you
this,
might have somebody that-
substantially similar ones. So if you have ones that you're not offering today, they're in somebody else's facility, but you're not doing store within a store, you could probably eliminate those. You're trying to profile the ones that are more probative to what you're actually offering. So if you're only doing ones that have drive-throughs and 15 of your 20 don't, I might try to pull other gross sales information on and show the lift of a drive-through, but the drive-through ones are the most relevant. So that's the issue as you go to pare down your company locations, because sometimes they're old legacy ones that your grandfather opened. Sometimes they're like smaller ones. Sometimes you're trying to figure out where your demographics are and where your system's going to be hot. And not every real estate choice is a good one. All right, so we're going to hang around here. I see them like pounding at the door with their faces pressed against it. Somebody left their iPad, which they have at the front. So to get that, I think lunch is our next thing. Boys, you were amazing. Next time we'll make this a little bit longer. Thank you so much, everybody. The lead lunch is